soar. I'm undefeated. Oh, jumping out of my skin, pull the cord. Yeah, I believe it. Oh, the past is everything we were. Don't make us who we are. So I'll dream until I make it real, and all I see is stars. It's not until you fall that you fly. When your dreams come alive, you're unstoppable. Take a shot, chase the sun, find the beautiful. We will go in the dark, turning dust to gold, and we'll dream impossible.
A beautiful day out there. Welcome to the first episode, Living Podcast. We want to know how Nigeria is before and after the independence, why the army took over the government, what went wrong, where did we miss it. These are the sides of the stories that you can never be taught in your schools. Olushola Ayobami is my name. For several years after the 1959 elections, the problems facing the country were many and disturbing. The politicians were very powerful. Foreign investors and capital lenders exercised their influence on the country through them. Useful development plans which failed to serve the interests of politicians were distorted. The second problem was clearly defined in Sir Tafawa Balewa's speech before Nigeria House of Representatives in 1964. He said, and I quote, "It must be obvious that no Nigeria can be contented so long as any major sector of the economy is controlled by foreigners." By far, the most important problem was the unfriendly relations among the regions of Nigeria. A constant source of political friction was the imbalance in the size of the regions. Population figures arrived at after two bitterly controversial censuses showed the largely northern region to have some 29 million people. This was more than half the country's population and ensured virtual built-in control of the federal legislature and institutions. The country in 1960 was ruled by a coalition government of Northern People's Congress, the NPC, and the National Convention of Nigerian Citizens, the NCNC. Action Group was the leading opposition party. Prior to 1962, each of the three major parties was the strongest party in one of the three regions. The NPC had dominated the northern politics. Because more than half of Nigerian population was estimated to live in the north, the NPC also dominated the federal executive and the legislative bodies. Its position was so secured that the NPC made no effort to be a national party. The NCNC was nationally organized. It was popular in parts of the West and was particularly powerful in the East. Though the main base of Action Group was the West, yet it formed alliances with some small parties outside the West. The West, at the federal level, was not influential. This was because the Action Group was in opposition. Many Yorubas did not like the situation. They felt that the exclusion of Action Group from the coalition was the exclusion of the West from participating in the federal power. This dissatisfaction was dangerous and should have been corrected because each of the three largest ethnic groups in the country, Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba and Igbo, had large population enough to form a country, and therefore each was so powerful that it could throw the country into crisis if it felt excluded from power or discriminated against.
run, I will climb, I will soar. I'm undefeated. Oh, jumping out of my skin, pull the cord.
In 1962, Chief S.L. Akintola and his group defied the leadership of Chief Awolowo. There was a split. There were maneuvers resulting in the declaration of a state of emergency in the West. With support from the northern-dominated federal government, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola, the Western Premier, was able to wrest control of the region from his more popular rival, Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Chief Akintola's group joined the Western branch of NCNC and formed the government of the Western region. Chief Awolowo and some members of his group were tried on the charges of treasonable felony and conspiracy. He was eventually detained and convicted in 1963. This action was regarded by many Westerners as the result of the exclusion from power, and they did not like it. The jailing in 1963 of the Action Group leader and the census controversy instilled fear into the regional politicians. The Northern People's Congress dominated the federal government. It was not national in character, and there was no sign that it would be. The ability of the federal government to determine the political features of the regions had been demonstrated in the West. Each region felt politically, and regional politicians of East and West felt personally insecure. Although NCSC was at some time in alliance with the ruling MPC, the East felt it was being frozen out of the nation's affairs. This feeling reached a climax in December 1964, when the first federal elections since independence were held. Chief Akintola outmaneuvered the Western NCNC. He succeeded in getting some members of the Western NCNC to form another party, the National Democratic Party, headed by Chief Akintola himself, and he allied the party with the MPC to form the Nigeria National Alliance (NNA). The NCNC and the Action Group allied themselves and became the United Progressive Grand Alliance (UPGA). The NNA managed to win the election of 1964, but charges of unfair practice were rife. The UPGA candidates and voters boycotted the elections. The future of the country was threatened. The president, for several days in January 1965, did not call on any leader to form a government. Finally, a coalition federal government was agreed and formed. The problem was still there because NNA had much stronger representation than the UPGA. The country was therefore divided roughly into two main political alliances. The split in the Action Group, the emergency in the West and crisis over the elections of 1964 greatly weakened the bonds of trust among peoples. The next opportunity of the UPGA to challenge the power of the NNA was an election in the West in October 1965. Discontent reached to high point when Chief Akintola's group with MPC support had retained power in the West. Charges of rigging were made and were widely believed. The elections were, however, declared legal. The results were announced, but was followed by widespread disturbances in the West. Many people were killed and properties destroyed.
I will run, I will climb, I will soar. I'm undefeated. Oh.
In the early hours of the morning, January 15, 1966, a section of the Nigerian Army revolted in Lagos, Enugu, Ibadan, and Kaduna. Many leading politicians, including the Prime Minister and the premiers of the North and the West, were killed. Heads of the civilian government of January 1966, we have Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe as the president, late Sir Tafawa Balewa Prime Minister, Dr. Nwafo Orizu as the president of the Senate. Till next time I come your way, please don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, comment, and share. Olushola Ayobami. I say bye for now.
Impossible. I will chase, I will reach, I will fly until I'm breaking out my cage like a bird in the night. I know I'm changing it into something big, better than before.